One of the things that I really enjoy since I've moved is my impulse trips. If I have to make a quick trip to the store, if I have to go and run an errand, I just put my shoes on and I go. And I know that the chances of me running into somebody that I know is very slim. I know that if I take the chance and I do this back home and just show up in whatever condition I am, one of the first questions that I'm going to be asked is, Gail, you don't have no shame? Shame. It's our cultural currency. It shapes our identity, it forms our reputation, and it creates that sense of belonging. It's the value that we get from how we're seen and how we're spoken about. It's that shame that I do have that has shaped the way in which I raised my kids. And so they present differently. The way in which they conduct themselves is different compared to their other classmates or counterparts. But the thing about shame is that we have the ability to use it as both a form of protection and a weapon. We see it used both ways. We see that you either have shame or you try to shame somebody. And something as simple as this platform, if I am not using it as an opportunity to bring shame, then it can be seen as, well, she talking about all these things. She don't have shame. Shame. It's something that is buried deep within our culture, and we use it as a way in which to bring about justice. It's no secret that dealing with this offense brings about a level of shame, deep shame, to both parties. And so that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about shame and how it is experienced on both sides. I want to talk about disarming shame, and I want to talk about this one thing that acts as cement that turns shame from a simple block into a brick wall. Let's go. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Our Mess His Canvas. I'm your host, Juvon. As we're on the journey of healing, I would have used words such as the betrayed, the person who strayed, the offender, the offending party. But as we are on a journey of healing, I want to rephrase some of those words. The hope is that anyone can listen to this, and we don't have to promote victimization. Neither do we have to target or attack anyone. There should be a safe space. So let's get into it. So in the moments that you sit with this and you attempt to start the healing process, there is that feeling of shame that is like an undercurrent. I remember experiencing crippling shame. And I think it had a lot to do with the fact that I still felt like this had something to do with me. My worth and my value was attached to this act. I remember also hearing my partner express their shame. And I couldn't understand because I felt like, well, what you feeling can't be shame. Because if shame was in the picture, we probably would not have reached all the way to this place. You know what I'm saying? I didn't understand what shame looked like on both sides. I understood what I was feeling. I understood the shame that I felt. I couldn't understand what shame would look like from on the other side. I remember being in a place where I want to get more information. I want to learn more about this thing. I want to know what to do and how to move and how to operate. But I don't want to engage with too much of it. You know, I don't want to interact with anything that I'm seeing because there's a part of me that is still, I don't want to accept that this happened to me, you know? Shame also looked like just still trying to show up and act normal, you know, just to save face because nobody could know that this is what we're dealing with. So now you're overcompensating to show up and show up well and not trying to appear as though anything happening at all. And then on the other side, shame was showing up as defensiveness because I was coming with a lot of questions in an attempt to try to understand and to make something make sense. And with every question that I come with, now they have to relive and retell. The mere fact that this was a secret in the first place is because of the shame that is tied to this whole thing. But the way in which I was looking at it, I felt like it can't be shame. This can't be shame because this? How is it that me talking about this makes you feel ashamed? But shame wasn't enough to stop this whole thing from happening. Like, to me, it didn't seem like the same type of shame. But I had to get to a place of understanding that shame presents differently and people react differently when faced with shame. And so that shame from the other side looked like avoiding responsibility, defensiveness, avoidance, just an unbearable amount of shame. It felt as though people could see this thing on me. People can look at me and see, oh, this is what happens here. It was a lot of shame. I started to question myself, like, why do I feel this amount of shame? I did not commit anything to be feeling this amount of shame. But I'll tell you this, shame started to lose its value when I started to understand the action for what it was. So let's break it down. What is it? We know that it's a breach of trust. We know that it is an act of deception. We know that it is a choice. But we also know that it is a symptom. It is not a root cause. It is a symptom of unresolved trauma, unhealed wounds, insecurity, and avoidance. So we know that that is what it is. What it is not. It is not the other person's fault. It is not unforgivable. It is not the full story, but it is also not identity defining. This does not define who they are, neither does it define who you are. It does not define the person who has committed the act, neither does it define the person against whom the act was committed. It is not identity defining. So when I started to look at this as what it is a symptom. I thought about the fact that if I go to the doctor with a cough and the doctor just gives me a cough suppressant, the cough might subside for a little bit, but it comes right back because I am treating the symptom. I am not trying to figure out what the root cause is. And so when we hear the term thrown around, once a cheater, always a cheater, it is because we are treating a symptom with a suppressant. The symptom is going to show itself again. But if I go to that doctor and I tell him about my cough and he says, I know the cure for your cough, 2 cinder blocks. Excuse me, sir, what? He says, yes, 2 cinder blocks. The reason for your cough is that you have acid reflux or GERD. And so, coupled with a change in your diet, you need to elevate your bed on these 2 cinder blocks so that when you're sleeping in the night, it will lessen the amount of acid. Your symptoms will go away naturally. You deal with the root of the problem. And so if we keep on treating this thing that is a symptom as the root cause and just giving a suppressant, it's just a matter of time before this act repeats itself. And so we keep on saying, well, once a cheater, always a cheater. If we are treating the symptom as a root cause, it will always come back. Which brings me to the other point of view that I had to adopt. I had to look at this as this is something that somebody did versus this is something that has happened to me. I know how that sounds. It sounds very insensitive. It sounds very invalidating. There is a purpose for thinking about it this way. It gives you the opportunity to now further separate yourself from this action. And I know that it sounds very invalidating. It sounds like it's something that we should not consider because it's very dangerous in trying to heal. However, I would argue that let's look at it like, do you know that there are some medical procedures that require body parts to be attached to a limb? So, for example, like sometimes you may see that somebody has an ear that they're trying to reconstruct and they would take the ear and attach it to the person's calf. You're looking at that and it looks ridiculous. Why does this person have an ear growing on their calf? But it is for a specific purpose, and that purpose is so that it can use the blood source so that it's now viable to be used for its intended purpose. For a temporary moment, it is important that this ear is attached to this calf. Not for forever, because imagine that ear is not serving a purpose if you keep this ear on this calf. So it is a mindset that we have to adapt for a moment, for the purpose of getting yourself used to the idea of separating, or getting yourself to a place where you can separate, this is what this person has done. Separate that from this is what has happened to me for a brief moment, so that separating yourself from this can give you the opportunity to see this act as a standalone and not think that it has anything that is tied to you personally. And this brings me to my third point, which is detangling the roots of your identity. A lot of times we are broken in this because we are trying to find us in the midst of this act. We are trying to find us in the midst of all of this happening. We can get obsessive with trying to find out details. We want to know all the things, when it happened, where, how, what time, what you tell me you was doing when you was, all of these things. We get fixated on getting all of the details. And the reason for that is because we are trying to find ourselves in there. And I will tell you, one, that causes more harm. So if you are in a place where you want to get all of the details, I would stop you right there. And this is coming from me. I've said before the way that I like to cross my T's and dot my I's. I want to know all the things. I want to know all of the details. But this time, I had to come to the realization that more is not always better. This time, getting all of the details is more to your detriment than it is a step closer to your healing. So I would just put that plug in there that getting the details as to how we got here is one thing, but getting into the nitty-gritties and trying to get all of the tiny little pieces to put this puzzle together to make it make sense, don't do that to yourself. It is only going to cause more harm. The other thing is that this allows you to detach or detangle your identity that is now rooted in this person, rooted in whatever they have done that is causing you to be out of sorts because this thing has happened. And so we get to a place of understanding or seeing the action for what it is, a symptom, and then we get to a place where we can separate that this is what somebody has done versus what has happened to me, temporarily adapting to that point of view. And now we can detangle our identity that is wrapped up in there, and we can stand alone. We can stand on our own, root our identity in God, and we get to a place where you're able to look at this thing objectively and gain a whole new perspective. Not only gaining the perspective, but it is beneficial for your healing. It is something that aided so much in me getting to a place where healing really started to take place. When I no longer looked at myself as a victim, where I no longer looked at this thing as something that was done against me. And I remember asking that question once. I didn't like the answer because then it didn't make sense. But I can tell you that now, looking back, it makes perfect sense. So I asked a question in an effort to try to understand. I asked, how did you find a way to work this? How did you find a way to pull this thing off? Again, me trying to find myself in the story. I was trying to figure out how were you able to do this and not stop and think about me? And the answer was, I found a way to separate the two. I found a way to separate the action that I was engaging in from you. And I said that to say that it was possible if they can get themselves to separate the action from you. Because a lot of times you would hear people say that I've heard from another male perspective, I have heard that they're not thinking about you in that moment. And only in them getting to a place where they can separate that they could operate and without feeling some type of way. And whereas it may seem as poor advice, it may not seem as the best advice, I said that to drive the point that it's something that is possible and it's something that we can adapt to. Adapting to this mindset or engaging in this practice of finding a way to separate yourself from this act, it is possible. This is not something that we're doing as a favor to them, to let them off the hook. It is something that you are doing to advance your healing process, to make your healing more substantial and something that helps so much when you're able to stand alone and you're able to look at this thing objectively and you can separate yourself and say, that is something that they did. And I do not have to feel the shame that is attached to this action. When I got to a place where I was able to do these 3 steps, that really dismantled shame to a place where I could talk about it. I don't have to feel shame in talking about this thing because it's not something that I did. My identity is not tied to this action. I am not tied to the decision of somebody else. That does not make me who I am. It does not change anything about me. And now I am in a place where I can dismantle shame, disengage shame, disarm shame. And it is not an identity that I have to hold on to anymore. It is not something that I have to use as a form of protection, as a form of silence, as a form